The 13th arrow left the bow with a hard snap and vanished across Moonreach Gorge. For 3 breaths, no one spoke. Then a spotter lowered his glass. Wide again. A low murmur moved through the officers gathered behind the firing line. 13 of the Alpha King's finest warriors had taken the same shot. 13 had failed. Mara Vale stood behind them with a silver water pitcher balanced against her hip. She had not been watching the target. She had been watching the red wind flags fixed along the gorge wall, the gray ash lifting from the braziers, and the dark arcs the arrows made before disappearing into the distance. The warriors had different stances, different releases, different strengths. Their mistakes should have scattered. They had not. Every arrow had drifted into nearly the same wrong corridor. Mara looked toward the stone range markers. Something was wrong. Enough, Commander Garrick Voss said. He stepped forward before the 13th warrior had fully lowered his bow. Broad-shouldered and immaculate in black military leathers, Garrick faced the viewing platform as if the failed trial had confirmed something he had expected all along. No warrior has broken the 4,000-meter line, Your Majesty. Alpha King Cale Arden stood at the center of the platform. He did not look disappointed. That was worse. His expression had become the still, unreadable one Mara had seen whenever military decisions were about to become final. Then the range tables stand, Cale said. An officer beside him opened a leather folder. Mara's fingers tightened around the pitcher. Those tables were not staying here. She had heard enough while serving the officers that morning to know copies were being issued to the border units before evening deployment. If the same correction used in this trial appeared in those calculations, trained warriors would trust it because the king had approved it. And trained warriors would miss for exactly the same reason these 13 had. Mara looked again at the flags. High wind west. Middle wind weaker. Ash rising almost straight before bending late. The official correction assumed something the gorge itself refused to support. Hey. Guard took the empty cup from her tray without looking at her. Water. She poured automatically. For most of the afternoon, no one had spoken to her except to ask for something carried, filled, or removed. That suited them. Silent servants were useful. Silent Omegas even more so. On the platform, the officer dipped his pen. Garrick glanced toward the range markers. Only for an instant. But Mara saw the tension in his jaw when his gaze shifted back. Not when the warriors missed. When he looked at the markers. Cale raised one hand before the pen touched parchment. Before I authorize these tables, he said, his voice carrying over the stone terrace. Does anyone here dispute the result? No officer answered. No warrior moved. Mara set the pitcher down. The small sound of silver against stone seemed impossibly loud. She stepped past the servant boundary. A guard turned sharply. Garrick's eyes found her. Cale looked down from the platform. For the first time that afternoon, the entire firing line noticed the waitress. Mara met the Alpha King's gaze. My turn. A guard moved to block her before she had taken a second step. Back behind the line. Commander Garrick's voice was colder. Remove her. Wait. Cale said it quietly, but the guard stopped at once. The Alpha King descended from the platform, studying Mara as though trying to decide whether she was reckless, foolish, or something less convenient. You dispute 13 royal warriors? No, Your Majesty. A few officers laughed. Cale did not. Then what are you disputing? The answer they were given before they raised their bows. Silence replaced the laughter. Garrick stepped between her and the firing position. She is a palace waitress. I can see that, Cale said. His gaze remained on Mara. Explain. Mara pointed across the gorge. Their releases were different, but their arrows entered the same corridor. If 13 skilled archers make 13 independent mistakes, the impacts should spread. Those didn't. You saw the impacts from here. Garrick demanded. I saw the flight. She indicated the flags at different elevations, then the ash above the nearest brazier. The correction assumes the wind carries consistently through the gorge. It doesn't. Garrick's expression hardened. And you know military range calculations because my father calibrated hunting bows in mountain country. I kept his records, measured terrain, and learned to read wind when distance made small errors expensive. She left his exile unspoken. Cale glanced toward the trial bow. What do you need? The range table. And that bow. Garrick objected immediately. Those are military materials. Then watch her touch them. Cale's order ended the argument. Mara examined the bow first. Limbs, string, knocking point, balance. Nothing obvious had been damaged or altered. She then studied the official table long enough to confirm the correction she had suspected. The numbers were wrong. Not carelessly wrong. Consistently wrong. She set the table down. "If I miss?" she asked. Garrick answered before Cale could. "Interfering with a royal military trial during deployment preparation can put you in a cell." Mara looked at Cale. "He is correct," the king said. She nodded once and took the bow. The weapon was heavier than the hunting bows she remembered, but its behavior was readable. She adjusted her stance, waited through one gust, then another. Someone behind her whispered, "She's aiming wrong." Mara released. The arrow vanished over the gorge. The spotter lifted his glass. Seconds stretched. Then his posture changed. Impact. Garrick turned. "Where?" The spotter gave the position. A murmur broke across the line. It was not the center of the distant target, but it was exactly where Mara had said the arrow should land after correcting for what the official table had misrepresented, and dramatically closer than any of the 13 previous shots. Cale looked from the target to Mara. "You knew where it would strike." "Yes." "Then the trial is corrupted." Mara lowered the bow. "I can prove the calculation is wrong. I cannot prove who made it wrong." That answer silenced him longer than a claim of victory would have. At last Cale turned toward the officer holding the authorization folder. "Do not sign." Garrick's jaw tightened. Cale faced Mara again. "The final deployment bell sounds before evening. Until then, you may substantiate what you've found. If you accuse my command without evidence, military law will still apply to you." "I understand." Garrick approached the table, placed 2 fingers beside the official ledger, and turned its cover toward her. Stamped into the leather was his command seal. "You believe these calculations were falsified," he said. "That ledger was certified under my authority." His eyes held hers. "So say it plainly, Waitress. Are you accusing me?" "No." Garrick's expression shifted by a fraction. Mara kept her hands away from the ledger. "I'm saying the calculation is wrong. If I name the person responsible before I can prove it, I become another bad measurement." Cale's gaze sharpened. "Then prove what you can." They moved to the gorge observation terrace with Garrick and 2 royal guards following close behind. From there, the firing line, distant target, and weathered stone markers could be seen against the descending mountain slope. Mara ignored the painted distance numbers. Instead, she found the remains of an old watchtower cut into the eastern ridge. "That foundation hasn't moved," she said. Cale followed her gaze. "No, neither has that split cliff." She identified another fixed formation farther downrange, then compared both against the marker sequence and the figures recorded in the ledger. Garrick folded his arms. "You are measuring a royal range by looking at rocks. I'm checking whether the numbers agree with things no clerk can move." She worked through the relationships she remembered from mountain calibration, known intervals, elevation changes, fixed reference points. Her father had taught her never to trust a painted marker until the land confirmed it. The result emerged slowly. The official 4,000-meter designation depended on reference positions that did not match the terrain. Cale crouched beside the ledger as Mara indicated the discrepancy. How large an error? Large enough to explain the grouping. And enough to be deliberate? Mara hesitated. "I don't know yet." That answer seemed to satisfy him more than certainty would have. Garrick tapped the command seal. "Where old landmarks are. Being compared against current military measurements by a servant who wants attention." Mara looked at him. "Then the archive will prove me wrong." Cale stood. "Bring the previous season's range records." A guard departed. While they waited, Mara studied the current marker sequence again. One notation in the ledger tightened something inside her chest. The angled correction mark was old-fashioned, almost obsolete. Her father had used a related system. Cale noticed her pause. "You recognize it?" "I recognize the method." "From your father?" Mara nodded. She offered nothing more. For now, she believed she understood the purpose of the alteration. 13 public failures at the king's celebrated trial made his warriors look incapable. Perhaps someone wanted rival packs to hear that Munreach's elite could not make a shot their own range demanded. "Humiliation," she said quietly. Cale turned toward her. "If someone wanted this discovered eventually, 13 failures would damage confidence in your command. Then why make all 13 miss the same way?" Mara looked back across the gorge. The question disturbed her because she had no good answer. If embarrassment were the goal, randomness would have been safer. Before she could reconsider further, The guard returned carrying an older archive volume. Mara placed it beside the current ledger. At first the differences seemed small. Then she found the same sector reference. One correction had changed. She checked another. Changed again. A third lay far beyond the Moonreach trial target. On a border approach no warrior had fired toward today. The same adjustment appeared there too. Kale leaned closer. This isn't one firing line. No. Mara turned pages faster now, following the pattern through sectors that had nothing to do with the ceremony. Her first explanation collapsed. Someone had not altered a single trial to embarrass the king. The false correction had been carried into multiple border ranges. Kale's voice dropped. Those sectors are on tomorrow's deployment route. Mara stared at the repeated figures. The question was no longer why 13 warriors had missed one impossible shot. It was how many warriors were about to trust the same wrong numbers. Tomorrow? Mara asked. At dawn, Kale said. The advance units leave the staging ground tonight. Her eyes returned to the archive. That shortened everything. She placed the older volume beside the current ledger and followed the altered correction through each border sector. The changes were small enough to survive casual inspection, but together they pushed firing positions toward exposed ground. Not errors. A system. The trial wasn't meant to humiliate you, Mara said. Kale's expression hardened. Then what was it meant to do? She looked toward the gorge where 13 arrows lay beyond sight. To make the wrong calculation look normal. Garrick gave a short, humorless laugh. One waitress sees a conspiracy in arithmetic and now the king's deployment is compromised. Mara ignored him. If 13 elite warriors accepted the table, failed, and still watched that table receive royal approval, no field commander would question the same correction tomorrow. Kale understood before she finished explaining. Where do these altered sectors place my archers? Mara traced the routes. Here, and here. Kale leaned over the map. The first position lost elevation. The second narrowed retreat through broken terrain. The third placed ranged units where an enemy approaching from the eastern ridge could answer from superior ground. His face went still. How many copies? Garrick answered. Deployment tables are already being prepared. Prepared or distributed? Some have gone to staging officers. Kale turned toward him. Stop further copies. Garrick hesitated only a heartbeat. Yes, Your Majesty. Mara noticed it. She also noticed his attention shift from the maps to her. The final deployment bell was no longer merely her deadline to prove an accusation. It was the point after which corrupted instructions could begin moving with men who trusted them. Kale tapped the older archive notation. You recognized this before. Mara knew she could no longer avoid the question. My father used an older calibration system. Garrick's eyes narrowed. Kale said used. He was removed from royal contract work years ago. For what? Mara forced herself to meet his gaze. Producing unreliable range calculations. The silence that followed felt heavier than the bow had. Garrick stepped closer to the archive. Vale. He said the name as though he had finally placed it. Edrin Vale's daughter. Mara did not answer. Garrick turned to Kale. Her father was disgraced for exactly the kind of discrepancies she now claims to have discovered. My father's case does not change those landmarks. No, Garrick said. But it gives you a reason to manufacture an accusation against the command that condemned him. The guards looked at Mara differently now. Kale did not defend her. That hurt more than she expected. Instead he asked, can your conclusion stand without your father's method? Mara looked at the maps, then at the immutable lines of the gorge beyond them. It had to. If Kale accepted her because he wanted to believe her, he would only be repeating the failure that had allowed false numbers to pass beneath a trusted seal. Yes, she said. Give me the original trial ledger. I'll prove the alteration without using anything my father taught me as authority. Kale nodded. They returned toward the firing line as the sun dropped lower behind the western ridge. The evidence case sat where the military clerk had secured it. The guard responsible for it frowned before they reached the table. Its seal was broken. Kale crossed the remaining distance first and opened the case. Mara looked inside. The original trial ledger was gone. Kale's hand remained on the empty case. Seal the range compound, he ordered. No one leaves until this is accounted for. Garrick looked at Mara. Convenient. She understood immediately. You think I took it. You handled the range table. You challenged the trial. You asked for the archive. And now the one record that might expose your accusation, or disprove it, has disappeared. I was with the king. Not every moment since you stepped across that servant line. Cale turned to the guard assigned to the evidence case. Who had authorized access? Military command, the range clerk, and anyone admitted by direct royal order. That did not clear Mara. Cale had given her access to the investigation. Garrick pressed the advantage. Until we know what happened, she should not touch another military record. Cale's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Agreed. The word struck harder than Mara expected. 2 guards moved beside her. You will remain inside the range compound pending inquiry, Cale said. Your palace duties are suspended. Mara untied the narrow service apron from her waist and placed it beside the silver pitcher she had abandoned earlier. Garrick watched without satisfaction showing on his face. That frightened her more than triumph would have. Beyond the terrace, officers continued preparing for deployment. Losing the ledger had not stopped the clock. Cale waited until Garrick moved away to question the evidence guard before facing Mara. Is there anything else you have not told me? She knew what he meant. Yes. His expression closed. My father wasn't accused of one bad measurement. His calculations repeatedly disagreed with newer royal tables. He insisted his system was correct. And you left that out. I knew what his name would do to mine. It did more because I learned it from Garrick. Mara accepted that without defense. I was afraid you would stop listening before we could test the numbers. So you decided what evidence I was allowed to judge. No, she held his gaze. I made a mistake. The admission did not soften him. Good. She did not need softness. If you believe me now because you want to, she continued, we are no better than everyone who believed that command seal because they wanted it to mean the numbers were safe. Something changed in Cale's face, but before he could answer, the distant preparation bell sounded. Not the final bell. A warning before it. Time was shrinking. Mara looked across the gorge. The ledger was gone. The archive could be challenged because of her father. But 13 pieces of evidence still existed where no clerk could replace a page. The arrows. Cale followed her gaze. All 13 are still in the impact zone, she said. Their positions can reconstruct the correction the warriors were given. You are confined. Then send guards with me. The lower gorge is restricted terrain, and the final bell will sound whether I am standing here safely or not. Cale studied her. Mara stepped closer to the boundary the guards had formed around her, but did not cross it. Don't release me because you believe me, she said. Don't clear my name. Keep me under guard. Measure everything I touch. She pointed toward the gorge. Give me one chance to prove it. Cale looked toward the gorge, then at the guards beside Mara. You remain under investigation, he said. 2 guards stay with you. You touch nothing they do not record. Agreed. Garrick returned before they reached the descent path. You are allowing a suspect into restricted terrain? I am allowing evidence to be measured, Cale said. If she is wrong, you will have delayed preparations for a servant's theory. Cale's gaze hardened. Then the cost will be mine. They descended. The lower gorge was steeper than it appeared from the firing line. Loose stones shifted beneath Mara's boots, and the afternoon wind struck unpredictably between the rock walls. She remembered paths like these from years beside her father, but memory did not make the ground forgiving. They found the first arrow below a fractured ledge. One guard marked its position while Mara identified the fixed landmarks visible from the impact point. The second arrow lay farther east. Then the third. By the 6th, the pattern was unmistakable. Different warriors had produced different small deviations, but all their arrows clustered around the same false correction. Cale crouched beside the measurements. So the missing ledger no longer matters. It matters, Mara said. Just not enough to erase this. They continued. Near the 10th arrow, a slab shifted beneath Mara's foot. She dropped hard against the slope, catching herself before the loose rock carried her farther. Pain tore through her left ankle. Cale reached her first. Can you stand? Mara tested the ankle and winced. Yes. That was not my question. She looked toward the remaining impact points. I can finish. Cale did not argue, but from then on he matched his pace to hers. By the 13th arrow, Mara's limp was impossible to hide. She compared the completed impact pattern with the fixed cliff line and old watchtower foundation. The reconstruction produced the same false relationship she had identified at the firing line. E1 and the terrain agreed without the missing ledger. Then she noticed something else. The error followed a sequence. Not merely an incorrect distance, but a deliberate conversion from observation markers into firing positions. Each adjustment shifted the next calculation in a predictable direction. Mara stared at the measurements. I've seen this structure before. Cale glanced at her. Your father? Not the error. The conversion process. She traced the sequence with one finger without touching the recorded evidence. Someone had to alter the figures between range certification and the tables sent to deployment officers. They would need access to both systems. Garrick's office controls both. So do people beneath him, Mara said. That still isn't enough to name him. Cale studied her for a moment, perhaps remembering how easily a trusted seal had once been enough for him. Above them, a bell rang. One interval remained before final authorization. Mara looked at the climb back toward Moonreach. With her ankle, they could return and present the physical evidence, or spend what remained of the deadline trying to complete the chain against Garrick. Not both. Her own name was still under suspicion. Her father's name was still stained. And neither mattered as much as warriors marching with false numbers. You need to go back, she said. Cale frowned. We go together. No. You can climb faster without me. And do what? Stop the deployment. On incomplete evidence. The evidence is complete enough to prove the tables are unsafe. Not enough to prove Garrick responsible. I know. If Cale stopped his army now and Garrick was innocent, the king would bear the political cost. Mara might remain the disgraced servant who had triggered it. She looked at the 13 measured impacts. My father spent years insisting the numbers were wrong. Maybe clearing his name has made me want the person responsible too badly. Cale said nothing. But those arrows prove one thing now. Your warriors cannot safely use those tables. She forced herself upright despite the pain. Stop the army first. And your accusation? Mara looked toward the firing line above them. We prove that after your people are safe. Cale held her gaze for one long second. Then he turned to the guards. One stays with her. One comes with me. Mara caught his sleeve before he stepped away. Don't tell them Garrick is guilty. Cale looked down at her hand. She released him. Tell them what we can prove, she said. The tables are unsafe. Something in his expression settled. Evidence before accusation. Yes. Cale climbed. Mara remained beside the 13 recorded impact positions, her left ankle throbbing with every shift of weight. The guard beside her kept the measurements in his own hands while she studied the sequence again. Range certification, conversion, deployment table. The same false adjustment had to pass through each stage. She could not access the military records now, but she remembered the documents she had already seen. The command seal on the trial ledger, the deployment tables in the archive, and the way Garrick had answered Cale when asked whether copies had been distributed. Above the gorge, voices rose. Then Cale's command carried across the stone. Hold every unit. The preparation sound stopped unevenly. Mara looked up. Cale stood at the firing terrace where he had nearly approved the tables earlier. Officers surrounded him. Garrick was already moving toward the king. The final orders are prepared, Garrick said loudly enough for the nearby ranks to hear. Stopping now signals weakness to every border observer. The range data has been independently shown to be unsafe by a confined servant whose father was condemned for faulty calculations, by 13 physical impacts and terrain that neither she nor her father can alter. Garrick's face hardened. Cale raised his voice. No unit leaves Moonreach using those tables. That order is mine. There was no taking it back quietly now. If Mara failed to prove more, the halted deployment would belong to Cale alone. Garrick understood that too. Then emergency command procedure requires replacement orders, he said. An officer brought forward a prepared authorization sheet. Mara's attention fixed on its lower edge. Even from several paces away, the seal sequence looked familiar. Bring that here. Garrick turned. You have no authority to examine it. Cale did not look at him. She does now. The guard carried the sheet to Mara without surrendering custody. Her eyes moved over the authorization marks. There. An obsolete sequence she had seen attached to the altered certification chain. Not proof by itself. But the same sequence appeared where it should not have appeared twice. Who can issue this emergency order? Mara asked. Garrick answered reluctantly. My command office. And who controls certification of the Moonreach range? My office. Who authorized distribution of the current deployment tables? Silence. Cale answered. The same command channel. Mara looked at Garrick. Access at every point. Still, access was not guilt. The seal can be used by officers beneath me, Garrick said. You have proved nothing except that my command performs its duties. Mara nodded. He's right. Several officers stared at her. She pointed toward the gorge. The seal does not prove who altered the calculations, but the 13 arrows prove what correction the warriors received. The terrain proves the correction is false. The deployment tables carry the same error, and this emergency order passes through the same access chain. Garrick's mouth tightened. Cale could have ordered his arrest then. He did not. What would make it conclusive, he asked. Mara looked toward the firing line. The same bow still rested where she had left it. Make the calculation answer for itself. Garrick followed her gaze. Another performance? No, Mara shifted her weight off her injured ankle. A repeatable result. She looked at the 13 warriors whose failures had begun everything. Reopen the firing line. Bring the council. Keep all 13 warriors here. Then she met Garrick's eyes. This time, everyone gets to see which numbers fail. The firing line reopened under a silence heavier than the one that had followed the 13th miss. The council gathered behind Cale. The 13 warriors stood together near the boundary stones, their earlier humiliation now part of the evidence Mara intended to use. Garrick remained under watch, but Cale had not ordered him restrained. Mara limped to the range table. Her ankle protested when she planted her left foot, so she shifted her weight carefully and pointed toward the gorge instead. 13 warriors fired with different bows, releases, and instincts. Yet their impacts formed one corridor. That is the first fact. The guard who had accompanied her below presented the recorded impact positions. No missing ledger is required to establish them. Mara indicated the old watchtower foundation and split cliff. Those landmarks establish the second fact. They have not moved, but the reference relationship in the current calculations has. An officer compared the surviving archive figures with the measurements. Mara continued. The same false correction appears in the deployment tables, and those tables passed through the same command channel that certified this range and prepared the replacement authorization. Garrick stepped forward. A command channel used by dozens of officers. You still cannot prove I altered anything. No, Mara said. Not from a seal alone. His gaze sharpened, almost triumphant. Then Mara reached for the trial bow. Garrick laughed once. So your answer is another lucky shot? My answer is that luck cannot be repeated on command. She checked the wind flags. High west, middle weaker. The same layered pattern she had watched while carrying water. She calculated from the fixed terrain rather than the official marker sequence, then announced the impact zone before raising the bow. If my reconstruction is wrong, the arrow will prove it. She drew. Pain pulsed through her ankle, but her arms remained steady. Mara released. The arrow crossed Moonreach Gorge. The spotter tracked it until impact. He lowered his glass slowly. Inside the declared zone. No one cheered. The silence was better. Cale turned toward the 13 warriors. You. He selected one of the men who had failed earlier. Use her calculation. The warrior stepped forward. Mara gave him the correction and moved. Away from the bow. That mattered. If only she could reproduce the result, Garrick could still make this about an unusually gifted waitress. The warrior drew and released. The spotter watched. Impact. He checked again. Corrected zone. A murmur broke through the council. The warrior stared across the gorge, then at the table that had caused his first failure. Mara faced the council. The warriors did not fail the range. The range data failed them. Now the evidence aligned. 13 original impacts, fixed terrain, surviving calibration records, corrupted deployment tables, and the authorization path that had carried the same deliberate conversion error through Garrick's command. Cale ordered the access records already under military custody compared against the relevant certification and distribution windows. The answer closed the final gap. Garrick's authority had been used at every required stage. His face changed. Not surprise. Recognition that there was nowhere left for the error to hide. You would have placed the ranged units here, Cale said, pointing to the altered border positions. Below superior ground, with retreat narrowed behind them. Garrick said nothing. The pattern supplied the motive his silence would not. A battlefield failure severe enough to discredit Cale's command while leaving emergency military authority positioned to pass into Garrick's faction. Cale did not draw a weapon. Commander Garrick Voss, you are relieved of command and detained pending judgment under military law. The guards moved. This time Garrick had no seal left that could stop them. Mara looked toward the 13 warriors. Their misses had begun as proof that no one could conquer the 4,000-meter shot. Now those same misses proved they had been engineered to fail. Cale's gaze found Mara across the firing line. She was still the Omega who had stepped beyond the servant boundary. But no one there was looking past her anymore. By nightfall, Garrick's command authority had been formally suspended and the corrupted deployment tables withdrawn from every unit still at Moonreach. No replacement order would leave until the range data had been independently checked. The 13 warriors were cleared of responsibility for the failed trial. Their shots had followed the calculations they were ordered to trust, and their recorded impact pattern had become part of the evidence against the system that failed them. Mara sat near the firing terrace with her injured ankle wrapped, while Cale placed 2 documents on the table before her. The first concerns your father. She looked up. The surviving records support his calibration method. The technical accusation that his calculations were unreliable will be corrected. Mara touched the edge of the document, but did not open it immediately. And the rest? Anything the evidence cannot prove remains under review. She nodded. That was enough. More importantly, it was true. Cale indicated the second document. I need someone reviewing Royal Range intelligence who does not answer to the officer whose calculations she audits. Mara almost smiled. You discovered that today? I had an unusually persistent instructor. She opened the document. The position carried access to field calibration records, authority to challenge range certification, and responsibility independent of military command. Mara read it twice. One condition. Cale waited. If I find a discrepancy, the officer responsible cannot suppress my report. Agreed. She looked at him. You answered quickly. I have recently developed doubts about unquestioned authority. This time she did smile. The quiet between them changed. Cale rested one hand on the table. When I stopped the deployment, that was my decision. You owe me nothing for it. Mara watched him carefully. And if I want something that has nothing to do with range tables? There was no command in his voice. No claim. What do you want? A chance to find out what exists between us when neither of us is trying to prevent a military disaster. Mara let the question remain a question. Then she said, a chance. Nothing more was required. Later, when the council chambers had emptied and Garrick was awaiting formal judgment, Cale found her again at Moonreach. The gorge had gone blue beneath the rising night. The same trial bow rested in his hands. He stopped beside Mara and offered it to her. He did not place it in her grasp. She looked at the weapon, then across the distance that 13 warriors had been taught to misunderstand. The red flags moved along the gorge wall. Mara watched the highest one first, then the middle, then the faint drift of ash above the last brazier. Exactly as she had when no one had bothered to notice the waitress carrying water behind them. She took the bow. Cale glanced toward the distant target. Should I go first? Mara settled her hands around the grip. My turn.